The roar was deafening, a relentless assault of wind and water. Inside his home in Quigilingok, Ryan David gripped his children, the wooden structure groaning under the immense pressure. It was early Sunday morning, October 12th, 2025, and outside, the world was dissolving. The floodwaters surged, lifting their house from its foundations, a terrifying arc adrift in a maelstrom. The flood lifted us up, and I didn't think it was going to happen, David would later recount, the memory etched in his voice. He yelled at his 4 children to huddle on the stairs, just in case they tipped over. Their home, now a fragile vessel, floated along a small creek, eventually slamming against a bridge, trapping them. Debris blocked their escape, and the terrifying ordeal had only just begun. This was the terrifying reality for countless families across western Alaska, caught in the unexpected and devastating path of what remained of Typhoon Halong. Communities like Kipnuk, Quigilingok, and Napakiak were not just experiencing a storm, they were being consumed by it. Homes were swept away, some with people still inside. Injuries mounted from flying debris. And in the chaos, an unknown number of residents were reported missing. How could a storm of such magnitude, a typhoon's remnant, unleash such widespread destruction on this remote Alaskan coastline, defying all expectations and leaving a trail of shattered lives and homes?
This is the damage after a sudden and powerful storm known as a microburst tore through Tempe, Arizona. High winds ripping the roof off this business. The semi-truck flipped on its side. Homes also damaged, trees crushing this apartment complex. More than 130 people now displaced.
I don't even know, where I'm gonna live. My building is uninhabitable.
We definitely have been more proactive than reactive in this storm case. Everybody seemed to come together. We spooled up the EOC. We were watching the weather. We involved NOAA Weather Service out of Fairbanks. They kind of guided us through, and it's just been all hands on deck, just getting ready, equipment ready, just in case that it did hit us as bad as it did for Murbach. So we were prepared more this time around.
And this is going to include helping communities assess their drinking water and wastewater systems. We'll be helping out with any spills or contamination and supporting, safe cleanup and recovery operations.
Before anyone understood what was coming. Before the storm, life in the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta moved with a rhythm dictated by the vast Alaskan wilderness and the Bering Sea. Communities like Kipnuk, Quigilingok, and Napakiak were small, close-knit villages, deeply connected to their environment. Subsistence fishing and hunting were not just traditions. They were a way of life, integral to survival in a region where modern amenities were often sparse. Houses, predominantly made of wood, were built to withstand harsh winters, their foundations set firmly into the permafrost or coastal plains. The initial signs of trouble for western Alaska began not directly with Halong, but with a precursor. Days before Halong's arrival, another powerful coastal storm had already battered the region. This earlier system brought significant coastal flooding and heavy rains, particularly affecting communities along the Bering Sea coast. While severe, this storm was within the realm of what residents and emergency services typically prepared for. It softened the ground, elevated existing water levels, and tested the resilience of local infrastructure, creating a subtle yet critical vulnerability. As this initial storm began to recede, attention turned to the Pacific, where Typhoon Halong was raging. Meteorologists at the National Weather Service began tracking its trajectory, a standard procedure for any significant weather system that might eventually impact Alaskan waters. Early forecasts indicated that as Halong transitioned into a post-tropical cyclone and moved northward, its remnants would likely track past the Pribilof Islands, predominantly affecting communities like Nome, St. Lawrence Island, and the western parts of the Seward Peninsula. These areas, accustomed to Bering Sea storms, initiated their preparations. The village of Shaktoolik, for instance, took the precaution of relocating over half its population to the higher ground of Unalakleet, demonstrating a proactive approach based on the expected path. Warnings were disseminated, focusing on these anticipated impact zones. However, this established predictability would soon be shattered. There was no immediate indication that the full, devastating force of a former typhoon would make an unprecedented eastward turn, setting a collision course with the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, a region that had just begun to recover from the previous storm and was now unknowingly staring down an even greater threat. The subtle buildup of coastal vulnerability, combined with the unforeseen shift in Halong's trajectory, created the perfect, catastrophic storm. The morning of Sunday, October 12th, 2025, dawned with a ferocity few in the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta had ever witnessed. The remnants of Typhoon Halong, defying all previous meteorological models, had taken a drastic eastward shift, placing the unsuspecting delta directly in its path. As the low-pressure system intensified and moved across the Bering Sea, it generated an unprecedented storm surge, pushing massive volumes of ocean water inland. Along the coast, the scene quickly devolved into chaos. Hurricane-force winds became a tangible, destructive force. In Kusilvak, wind speeds reached a staggering 107 miles per hour, while Toksuk Bay reported gusts of 100 miles per hour. These weren't just high winds. They were the kind of winds that tear structures apart. Homes, many already sitting on saturated ground from the previous storm, were subjected to a two-pronged assault: relentless wind and rising water. The floodwaters, pushed by the storm surge, crested at heights far exceeding normal high tides, in some areas between 4 and 6 feet above. This wasn't merely flooding, it was an inundation that transformed the landscape. In Kwigillingok, Ryan David's family endured the terrifying experience of their home being lifted and carried by the surge, a chilling testament to the water's raw power. The structure, now unmoored, floated precariously along a small creek before crashing into a bridge, trapping them. In Kipnuk, the scale of destruction was immediate and widespread. At least 8 homes were reported to have been pushed clean off their foundations, torn from their moorings as if by an invisible hand. The impact was swift and indiscriminate. In Kongiganak, tribal police officer Milton Bunyan described a scene of devastation. It's very disastrous. Boardwalk through the school is gone. There's the house that has its roof off. Roland Andrew II, another officer, added, "We've never seen this before here in this village." It was the highest tide. This sentiment echoed across the region. Footage from Emanak showed powerful winds and surf flipping a boat on its side, a stark visual of the ocean's uncontrolled fury. Even Bethel, a regional hub further inland, experienced significant flooding. At approximately 9:30 a.m., water spilled over roads near the city's boat harbor, inundating river and Slofside neighborhoods. A large barge, torn from its moorings, was seen jammed against the Brown Slough Bridge, cutting off a vital access route. While Bethel's homes largely remained stable compared to those on the immediate coast, power lines were down and several roads became impassable. Across the affected communities, the human experience was one of sudden terror and desperate improvisation. People trapped in their homes, some now floating, made frantic calls or posted on social media seeking help. The wind's roar was incessant, the sound of splintering wood and rushing water, a constant soundtrack to the unfolding disaster. Debris carried by the wind and water became dangerous projectiles, causing an unspecified number of injuries. For those sheltering in communal spaces like school gyms, often running on generator power, the reality of their displacement was immediate and stark. The storm was not just a weather event. It was a profound rupture in the fabric of their daily lives, transforming familiar landscapes into a watery, debris-strewn wasteland in a matter of hours. The immediate aftermath of Typhoon Halong's remnants striking western Alaska triggered an urgent, coordinated investigation into the disaster, focusing on search and rescue and understanding why the storm's impact was so unexpectedly severe. As the storm raged and then began to recede, multiple agencies mobilized. The Alaska National Guard deployed 5 helicopters and 2 fixed-wing aircraft, working in conjunction with the U.S. Coast Guard and Alaska State Troopers. Their primary mission was to locate and rescue individuals trapped in their homes, many of which had been swept away or severely flooded. State Emergency Management spokesman Jeremy Zedek reported numerous rescues, highlighting the retrieval of 24 people from just 2 houses in Kwigillingok and an additional 16 in Kipnuk. The challenge for searchers was immense, complicated by power outages, damaged infrastructure, and the uncertainty of whether residents had been in their villages when the storm hit. While initial reports spoke of dozens missing, most were thankfully accounted for, underscoring the effectiveness of the rapid response, though at least 1 person remained officially unaccounted for across the broader affected region. Simultaneously, meteorologists and climatologists began dissecting the storm's unusual behavior. Alaska climatologist Rick Toman quickly identified a critical deviation from typical Bering Strait storm patterns. The National Weather Service had initially projected Halong's remnants to track north, passing the Pribilof Islands and reaching Nome before dawn on Sunday. However, the storm's low-pressure center took a sharp eastward turn, a very unusual storm track, according to Toman. This shift meant that the full force of the storm surge, which would normally impact communities further west, instead slammed directly into the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. Joshua Ribile, a forecaster at the National Weather Service's Anchorage office, continuously updated forecasts as the storm unfolded, adjusting peak water level predictions for eastern Norton Sound communities as the reality of the storm's eastern trajectory became apparent. The deviation effectively put those usual rules of thumb out the window. This meteorological analysis was crucial in understanding why communities like Kipnuk, Kwigillingok, and Napakiak, which were not the primary focus of earlier warnings, bore the brunt of the devastation, experiencing hurricane-force winds and record-breaking coastal flooding. Further investigation by the Alaska Department of Transportation and Public Facilities involved damage surveys. These assessments revealed the widespread destruction of homes and infrastructure, including damaged boardwalks, unroofed buildings, and extensive erosion of coastal banks and roads due to the powerful waves and storm surge. The initial findings quickly led the Alaska Association of Village Council Presidents to organize calls with affected residents and officials, gathering first-hand accounts of the damage and coordinating further relief efforts. The comparative analysis with Typhoon Merbok in 2022, a significant storm in its own right, suggested that Halong's remnants might have caused even greater devastation in some areas, indicating the extreme nature of this event. The investigation pointed to a confluence of factors: the initial vulnerability created by a preceding storm, the rapid and unforeseen eastward shift of Halong's remnants, and the sheer power of the resulting storm surge and winds. This combination created a disaster that was both geographically unexpected and historically severe, leading to a profound reevaluation of storm prediction models and emergency preparedness protocols for the remote Alaskan coast. In the wake of Typhoon Halong's unexpected assault, the communities of Western Alaska faced a monumental task of recovery. The initial days were dominated by the ongoing search and rescue efforts, which ultimately accounted for most of the previously missing residents. Over 30 people were rescued, a testament to the swift action of the Alaska State Troopers, National Guard, and Coast Guard. While miraculously, no deaths were immediately reported, an unspecified number of individuals sustained injuries from flying debris, adding to the immediate crisis. The physical losses were staggering. Dozens of homes were destroyed, swept from their foundations, or rendered uninhabitable. Families were displaced, often sheltering in emergency facilities like school gyms, some operating on limited generator power. For many, these homes represented generations of life in the Delta, embodying cultural heritage and personal history. Beyond homes, essential infrastructure suffered severe damage. Boardwalks were gone, roads were washed out by erosion, and power outages plagued entire villages. The public reaction was one of shock and a rallying cry for support. Governor Mike Dunleavy quickly amended a disaster declaration to include the hardest-hit areas of the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, promising every effort will be made to help those hit by this storm. Emergency management specialists were dispatched to key locations like Bethel, Nome, and Kotzebue to coordinate a massive disaster response. For survivors, the aftermath was a landscape of quiet devastation. Ryan David and his children, after their harrowing escape, faced the reality of a home no longer where it belonged. The sheer emotional toll of such an experience, coupled with the uncertainty of rebuilding in remote areas with limited resources, cast a long shadow. The focus shifted from immediate survival to the daunting long-term process of assessment, cleanup, and reconstruction, a process that would require sustained support and resilience from both individuals and the wider community. The human cost, while not measured in immediate fatalities, was profound in the disruption, displacement, and material loss experienced by thousands across the region. The Typhoon Halong event in Western Alaska stands as a critical lesson in the unpredictable nature of extreme weather, particularly in a changing climate. The unusual storm track demonstrated that historical meteorological patterns cannot always be relied upon, necessitating more adaptable forecasting and emergency response systems. For Alaska's remote coastal communities, the disaster underscored the urgent need for resilient infrastructure capable of withstanding unprecedented storm surges and hurricane-force winds. The coordinated search and rescue operations, which saved dozens of lives, showcased the vital importance of multi-agency collaboration in remote disaster zones. This incident also highlights the vulnerability of communities reliant on subsistence living and traditional housing to rapid environmental shifts. In the end, Halong was more than a record-breaking storm. It was a profound warning, a stark reminder of the delicate balance between human habitation and the raw power of a changing planet, urging a deeper understanding and preparedness for the storms yet to come.